Okay, thank you very much indeed, and welcome everyone, both here at the Guildhall and watching this on various devices at home and elsewhere. I'm Councillor Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat member for Baffins, North Milton and South Copper. I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness. Please be assured that we have put appropriate cleansing and social distancing measures in place to ensure that this meeting is undertaken in a COVID-secure manner. This has included a request for all attendees to have taken a lateral flow COVID test within 48 hours of the meeting, the use of the NHS Track and Trace app or attendee log, 2 metres social distancing, wearing of masks when not seated, a one-way system here in the Guildhall and a temperature check upon arrival. Limited public seating has been made available and members of the public have kindly availed themselves of this, and I'll come to those in a bit. However, this meeting is also being webcast, as you may have noticed if you're watching it on the web, to allow people to attend remotely if they wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. I would ask everyone here to remain seated throughout the duration of the meeting and to wear a face covering unless seated. Now, we do have some deputations, which I'll come to in a bit, but we'll deal with those as we go along. I just have a few items of housekeeping, which is if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room, the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Now, as I said earlier, this meeting will be live streamed. This means everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Luckily, the deputations were all written, so that's not going to happen. But members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. We've got 2 members of the public who I'll come to in a bit who've got a special role within this meeting, but I will ask them whether they want to be have their face on the extensive webcast or not. But I would suggest everyone could use the microphones, please, and if you don't know how to use them, we'll give you an education as we go along, and also please switch them off when they have finished. So before I'd like to start, please, by introducing everybody and hope that the camera works. So can I start with over there, which is Anna, who is our Democratic Services person.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Lovely. Nicola?
Good afternoon, Nicola Clanahan, Temporary Head of Housing Needs Advice and Support.
Excellent, thank you very much. Right. Now I'll go from the back towards the front. Meredith.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director for Buildings.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Sam Rickard, Acting Housing Regulations Manager.
Claire Hardwick, Head of Private Sector Housing.
Councillor Scott Pater-Harris, the Conservative spokesperson for Housing and Preventing Homelessness, and also Councillor for Hillsey Ward.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director of Housing.
Lauren Taylor, Housing Voiding Allocations.
Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing.
And now the 2 people in the front row who are incredibly important. So please come and just say who you are, and also whether you want any of your comments, your faces to be put on our webcast or not. Okay, and you're here because, I mean, aside obviously from being a resident of Buckland. Okay, that's excellent. We may come back to discuss that a bit more as we go along, but thank you for that, Dawn, and welcome. Now, please switch the microphone off, which means pressing that red button. Don't worry, politicians never do it, it's all right. Maria.
Maria Cole, representing the Residents' Consortium and the CLG.
Okay. And those 2 groups of people who are watching are constituencies of local residents who the council regularly involved in various aspects of its policy making, and they have a right to come here and also make deputations if they wish, and I'll come to each of them as we go along. We can now go to the actual agenda itself. The first item is any apologies for absence. Anna, do we have any apologies?
Councillor Cal Corkery.
And he is the Labour spokesperson for housing and preventing homelessness. He has also, however, sent in various written deputations. So what I'm going to suggest, Anna, is if you could read them out as each item trundles along, rather than all three at once, that will help further the discussion, if that's all right. Now, at this stage, there's declarations of interest which cover Scott and me. Scott, I don't have anything interesting to declare, do you?
Nothing at all.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay, so we'll move to item 3, which is the management of energy provision in empty local authority housing properties. Meredith, do you want to talk about this, please?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. I don't usually start introducing reports with an apology, actually, but I will in this case. So, apologies first. Since the report was written and published, there's been rapid developments within the utilities industry, global energy demand, and a number of other factors have overtaken us, to the extent that this morning I've received an email from Utilita, the company we've been undertaking the pilot around managing utility meters within void properties, advising us that they're temporarily ceasing taking on new customers, and they will need to pause the pilot at this point in time. We've been in discussion with them all day, understanding the issues that we face, and how that affects our existing customers, etc. And they cited the factors that we've seen, I think, played out in the media over the weekend, such as unprecedented worldwide energy demand. Gas prices actually rose 12% in one day last week, and also the utilities price cap has been a number of reasons for why they can't take on new customers at this point of time, and the reason why we have to pause the pilot. They've assured us in the conversations we've had today that the service to exist let me pause for that. They've assured us in conversations we've had today that the service to existing customers will remain their priority, and we've got ongoing conversations through Lauren and Andrew Waggett in the energy team in terms of how that will pan out moving forward. But I think I just wanted to bring you up to speed with that before we started talking to the actual report.
I think thank you is the only thing I can say after that. That's a serious problem. I think that's an understatement. But clearly the chaos in the global energy market at the moment has many repercussions. And this unfortunately seems to be one of them, which is very, very depressing. If colleagues are okay, I'd like to suggest a way forwards, which is actually, because is it right, Meredith? Have they said to us that they're never going to darken our door again, and this won't change. If the situation gets better, they'll never touch us with a barge pole. Am I wrong?
Yes, they've reassured this is a temporary factor, and because of the unprecedented increases and what we've experienced over the past couple of weeks has caused this issue. They're very keen to work with us going forward. Very keen to continue with the pilot. And as I think the conversations we've had is that as soon as the energy and utility markets start to stabilise, they're very keen to revisit and work with us in terms of taking the pilot forward.
Okay. Have they got any idea how long this is going to last for? I mean, does anyone have any idea about what on earth is going on?
No, I think we've all seen what's been occurring in the media over the past few days, and I think that all we can do is just update you as and when we get firm developments from our brokers, but also from Utilita in terms of how the market is shaping up going forward.
Okay. On that, again, thank you for that, Meredith. Okay, that helps, because the easiest thing would be to just scrap the whole thing. But clearly, if they're saying they're still interested, that's not right. What I'm suggesting to colleagues here is that we actually raise some of the questions we were going to raise anyway. The debate isn't academic, because we're still talking to Utilita, and there's various other things we've got to do. So we can raise some of the issues that we were going to raise anyway, and some questions for further discussions. But at the end of that, I propose that we defer this report until such time as we know, or the earliest opportunity after we know, when we can resume this, and then we can also come back with a report that may reflect some of the issues that we were raising. Is that reason? Is there any, Anna? Is there any reason I cannot do that?
You can defer the item to a future.
Okay, that's excellent. That's good. Right. So, if I could start. Scott, did you have any? Oh, sorry, my fault. It's been so long since I've done one of these. So, Maria and Dawn, we normally ask people from the Residents' Consortium first for any views or opinions they may have about individual reports. That does form part of it. It's primarily for Dawn's benefit, so she's not been to one of these meetings before. So feel free to put forward any ideas you may have. If you have none, that's absolutely fine. No one's going to think any worse of you. No? Okay, Dawn? No, that's absolutely fine. Maria, did you have anything at all?
As you're minded to defer, I think it's better if I just defer any questions that I'd had until it's...
Okay, all right, that's absolutely fine. I want to try and make sure everything is included as early as possible. Scott?
There's not really much to say. I think Europe has pretty much hit the nail on the head with this one. I think it's an issue that's not just across Europe, it's across the whole world. It's a global crisis. I mean, gas prices have tripled in Europe in the last year already. And obviously the Eurozone has seen prices, index has risen to its highest level since 1996, since the records began. So I think it's the biggest rise since the last global financial crisis. So it tells you sort of where we are with energy pricing at the moment. The ripple effect is what concerns me. I think the ripple effect is important. I mean, on other commodities like food and oil, I think that's something that we should be very cognizant of the fact that in this portfolio, Councillor Sanders, and I just think I look to you guys over there to keep an eye on this, because I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't think we all have an idea of it, and it's quite worrying when the rate of inflation is that high in the Eurozone, and with the central bank recommending 2% and we're actually getting 3% now. So I don't know where it's going to go. It might dip back down very quickly, it might not. They're talking about a gas grab across Asia as Asia comes out of their last lockdown, which I think is a big issue. Also with the issues that we had in America. So obviously, for example, Texas had all the bad weather last year, and obviously they haven't been able to funnel as much gas as they would normally, and that's obviously had a knock-on effect as well. So it's a complete basket case, if I'm honest. That's the best way I can put it. So I don't really have any questions, but that's my assessment of the situation.
Well, thank you. That may be among the more sensible ones that I've seen in a long while. I mean, Councillor Corkery did have a deputation, so Anna, could you just read that out, if that's all right?
Yeah. In principle, this makes sense and has potential benefits of making life easier to both tenants and the housing service, in addition to providing cost savings. However, I do wonder if the opportunity to move void properties over onto tariffs which utilise 100% renewable energy is being missed here. While I appreciate there may be a cost uplift of circa 1% for such a tariff, I believe the environmental benefits of doing so more than outweigh this, and that any negative impact on the finances of lower income households who move into these homes could be offset through a subsidy or rebate funded through the expected council cost savings.
Okay, thank you for that, Anna. Councillor Corkery doesn't know what we've just been told. So he sent his apologies long before this meeting.
Just on that, Darren,
sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just reading what Cal's put, I think, I mean, I know he's not here to actually argue the point, so I feel a bit guilty about doing it, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's just that he's talking about, obviously, renewable energy, and I think he's obviously not putting in the fact that the start-up cost of actually doing it is going to cost considerably more than what we were planning to do with Utilita. I think we should be cognizant of that fact, that actually it's going to cost a little bit more. And also noting that over the last year, wind energy is at the lowest it's ever been, because we've had the least windiest time of year.
Indeed, and I think the idea is we actually need to provide more wind, or indeed more onshore wind farms and more solar panels.
Lots of hot areas.
And there's always been a lot of, this is the council chamber for heaven's sake, and that's why meetings have to be shorter, in my humble view. So, Meredith, thank you for that. Yeah, we are up a gum tree, unfortunately, on this one. And I think it will have a major impact on every single authority across the country, these sorts of things, with cables keeling over in the English Channel, and us having about 1/9 of the storage capacity of the Netherlands. We're a bit stuffed in this country at the moment, and frankly nobody knows what's going on. You've been very kind and very diplomatic about the situation, but no one knows what's going on. We're hearing of government-backed loans for large companies whilst letting small and medium-sized companies go to the wall. So everything is on hold whilst everybody wonders how the chips are going to fall. So I think deferring this report is sensible. I think taking on board some of the things that have been raised here is good. So, for instance, looking to see whether we can get this as green as possible. We are in a climate emergency, but also recognising what we can't do is, for instance, have people who are currently on tariffs being in a system whereby they pay a hell of a lot more. And the balance between being able to eat, being able to heat is a difficult one. We know for many people in the city, many poor people in the city, I've got to get that right. So I'm keen that we do look at the environmental benefits. We've now got to look at it in two ways. First is the cost-benefit analysis, the start-up costs versus the long-term savings. And the second one is the impact on energy prices, because they've all gone through the roof, and they're going to go through the roof. And we don't know when they're not going to go through the roof. So I think if Anna, if those points that have been raised in discussions that could be noted in the minutes as sort of ways that can help Meredith negotiate his way through this minefield, it's a shame really. But so let's get this right. Everybody who is in the pilot is okay? That is correct. Okay, so no one will suffer as a result of this. And presumably what the current system for void energy management will just continue everywhere else until further notice. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct, Councillor Sanders. I think the key thing is that the learning that we've developed over the past 6 months will play that into the work that we're doing across the other areas.
Yeah, and I think that would be hugely helpful, because we can't do is just let this chaos that isn't our fault have an impact on people who may be able to save money as a result. But I would, sorry, Meredith, you wanted to say something?
The other bit I was going to add then, Councillor Sanders, is obviously we run platforms such as Switched on Portsmouth, where we can give advice to our residents as well about what's happening in the market at the moment, and all of our social media platforms are being updated as we speak to make sure that that information is up to date and current, giving good advice to our residents as well.
Yes, and I would say that the energy services team recently won awards, I believe, from Innovation and Efficiency South East as Best Green Council. So I have a sneaking suspicion they know what they're doing, which is always very helpful. So it's a very, very good thing, Switched on Portsmouth, and we want to try and make sure I have more solar panels across the city and cheaper bills as well, and a greener environment. So sorry about that. That's nearly as long as a planning committee that defers things. But Anna, is that all reasonably clear for the minutes? Yes? Excellent. Thank you, Maria and Scott, for those contributions. That was really helpful. Okay, so we move to item 4, which is an update on assistance for people to secure a private rented home to reduce homelessness and housing need in the city. Paul, Claire, Sam, I don't mind who.
It's me presenting this one, thank you Chair, and I'm supported by Nicola Clanahan and Janice Davis here as well. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the assistance for people to secure a private rented home to reduce homelessness and housing need in the city, and it includes an update on previously agreed actions from January of 2020. A report was brought for decision back in last January to this forum outlining options regarding new forms of assistance, and the decision was taken at that meeting to proceed with further investigation and pilot of 2 schemes, a 0% interest loan scheme for deposits and rent in advance, and a bond scheme to offer guarantees to landlords as an alternative to paying a deposit or providing as a guarantor. Due to the impact of the pandemic, work to develop these 2 schemes was paused, and as the city moves into recovery, the needs of residents and focus of the City Council resources previously identified means that there may be a change. Therefore, the outcomes of the original report have been reassessed and new recommendations are made within this report. Sections 4 and 5 of the report outline the impact of the pandemic on households and give an update on the discretionary housing payments. And then moving on to section 7 of the report, so that is regarding an update of the pilot of the 0% loan scheme. Negotiations continued following approval last January, but were interrupted by the pandemic, and discussions began again last summer, but in September of last year, the local credit union notified the council that their board had decided not to proceed any further with a rent deposit loan pilot scheme. Investigations were made to find alternative providers of the pilot that would meet the needs of the scheme and the City Council's finance rules. There are currently no other suitable credit unions or not-for-profit personal finance lenders operating in Portsmouth who provide unsecured personal finance. And therefore, the current position is there is no suitable provider, and it's proposed that the pilot is not continued. Section 8 of the report covers the bond scheme, and again, due to the pandemic, the Housing Needs Advice and Support Service did not have the capacity to develop the bond scheme last year. However, the PRS Access team are now ready to take the lead on implementing that bond scheme alongside other incentives. Resources to manage the bond scheme were identified within the original decision report, and the £85,600 funding that would now be required to undertake the pilot bond scheme for the next 12 months. There's currently no identified source of funding from this within existing cash limits, so in line with the original decision, it's proposed that if the decision is made to continue with the bond pilot, a formal request for the use of reserves is submitted. Finally, in section 9, we'd like to highlight some of the other work that's been undertaken to support people into the private rented sector, particularly during the pandemic. Back in 2019, funding was obtained from Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to enable the pilot of the private rental access scheme. The team started in March of last year and continued to work throughout the pandemic to help find accommodation and secure tenancies for families in temporary accommodation and for people moving through the rough sleeping pathway. And all staff resources for this service has been funded from Homelessness and Rough Sleeping grants. The team is responsible for being the main link between Housing Needs Advice and Support and landlords regarding finding private tenancies for those who have been in some form of temporary accommodation or emergency accommodation. And the team carry out negotiation on properties and rents, and also to inspect the property to ensure appropriate property standards are maintained. In the year from March 2020, the team assisted 43 families into self-contained homes and 86 single people into houses of multiple occupation. So far this year, they've supported 32 families and 40 single people, and the number continues to increase. Using grant funding allocated for homelessness and rough sleeping, the team will continue to function until at least the end of the financial year, and we're assessing the value of the work that's been going and looking at how we can make that continue. So, coming to an end, the recommendations, as in section 2, are that that we approve that the 0% rent deposit loan pilot is no longer suitable for delivery, that subject to funding, that we proceed with the development of the bond scheme piloted over the next 12 months as one element of a range of options offered to landlords to increase access to the private rented sector. Subject to that recommendation, we would submit a request for reserves to fund the one-year pilot, and also to recognise the work of the private rented sector access team in helping over 70 families and 123 single people to access the private rented sector, and approve the completion of the pilot to understand if a longer term service can be sustainably provided. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Paul. Maria, was there anything you wanted to say about this report? That's all right, take your time. When you do, please turn your microphone on.
Thank you. Yes, I'm quite disappointed at the decision of the Claimants Union, so I can understand why we decided to discontinue the scheme for the loans. It's a shame that they couldn't help, but anyway. 8.5, it talks about the reserves from the Cabinet. Do we know when it's actually going to go to Cabinet?
It doesn't need to. The leader can make that decision about how the reserve is used.
Right, okay, thank you. Section 9, I just felt I wanted to say on behalf of the homeless and the people that needed housing, the private rental sector access team should be very much commended for their continuing work, especially through the pandemic. There has been a visible reduction of street homeless people around the city, and I just think that the Portsmouth City Council has been working hard to help people through difficult circumstances, and I'd just like to convey thanks to the access team for the work that they've done and they're continuing to do. I then get on to the impact papers, page 45. Sorry, I'm getting in the muddle now with finding papers. Do you find that landlords of multiple properties take quite a bit of advantage of the council's improvement schemes and asking them for money?
Probably best if I ask Janice whether you want to answer that question.
What do you mean by the improvement scheme?
Well, we give money, don't we, to landlords to help them improve their properties, especially if it's safety, health and safety.
That wouldn't be through my scheme. I don't.
Right.
I paid the. I don't give incentives to landlords to improve their properties. I think that would come from Claire's team.
Right.
No.
Okay. Right.
We also don't do that. No.
Page 46. It was talking about unsuitable and insecure housing are among wider determinants for poor health outcomes, and I think it's needs to be seen that if people are in decent housing, the call for the NHS and the mental health support people isn't needed so much. If people are living in bad conditions, then that does make them more ill, more worried and everything. So I think, the fact that Portsmouth has got good standards for its housing is definitely a bonus, unlike a certain other place I could mention. Page 47. Sorry, but I do read the boring bits, don't I? Is there any steps that we can take to encourage landlords to accept tenants with disabilities? You say it's hard to get them to put in adaptations, but are there any steps at all that we can do to encourage them?
We're constantly working with the Landlords Association. Janice will be talking to a wide range of landlords. So part of the negotiation that the team will be undertaking is what can we offer to take people, and if part of that is about how we can convince them if to take people that have got disabilities, if there is a need for an adaptation, then we go through that. But we'll also be looking at all the other options that we might have for somebody in those sort of needs, because there could be a wide range of solutions. It might not necessarily be the private rented sector that's the best outcome for them. There might be social housing or a number of other options.
Right, thank you. Page 48. You mentioned here about applicants qualifying for assistance from LEAP. I am so relieved that LEAP is still being used, because back in January, on the 28th of January, I phoned Switched On Portsmouth to ask for help because my electric contract was finishing on the 28th of February. I was promised a phone call back to help arrange whether I change suppliers, where I go, what I do. I'm still waiting for the phone call. It was only by pure chance that I still had a phone number for LEAP, and within 24 hours I had an interview and they did it for me. not switched on Portsmouth, I'm sorry, but certainly for me they were switched off. So that's just that. And the last one, page 52, it's, right down the bottom it says there may be opportunity to link customers to employment support. Does that include resident engagement team? Because that's one of the things they've been doing, or is it just, I don't know whether resident engagement would be looking for work for people who are just council residents, or would it be for anybody? Did that make sense?
The resident development team is funded by the Housing Revenue Fund, so it's ring-fenced to support purely social tenants, so it doesn't extend to the private sector work that we do. But there is work across the council to encourage people and support people into work, so we'll look to link people in with the relevant departments across the council and working in partnership with the DWP and the Job Centre.
Thank you. You're relieved to know that's it for that one. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Maria. That was superb. Don, did you have anything else at all?
No.
Okay, that's absolutely
Maria
fine.
said most of what I wanted to say.
Excellent. I'm so pleased there are no rehearsals here. This is absolutely magnificent. Thank you. This time, if I may, no, Scott, you go first.
No, if we're going to go do it properly, we should go to Cal's thing to be read out.
That's okay, that's fine. Okay, well, I was just trying to mix it up because this is what we would normally do. But yes, if you could read Cal's thing out, Councillor Corkery's deputation, I should say, not thing, that would be very helpful.
It is encouraging to see this work progressing as access to the private rented sector remains one of the most significant housing issues facing local people, in particular those on low incomes and in precarious employment. However, I am extremely concerned by the savage cuts to the discretionary housing payments, DHP, budget detailed in section 5, as well as being used to facilitate access to the private rented sector through deposits and rent up front. DHPs are used to support low-income households subject to government benefit cuts such as the bedroom tax and the benefit cap. To slash over 25% from this budget is going to see the poorest and most vulnerable pay the heaviest price, plunging many more further into financial hardship and homelessness. I note that other local authorities have chosen to top up their DHP allocations with local funds in order to meet the needs of their residents, and call on the Cabinet to seriously consider doing the same here to ensure that vulnerable people are not left without the help they need.
Thank you for that, Anna. Before I go to Scott, I would just say that in Cal's second paragraph, he's referring to cuts made for by the government. He's not completely clear as to whether those are government or council cuts, but those are, for some reason, but those are related to the government. But we may come back to that in a bit. Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. I'm just going to probably start on the depressing stuff from Councillor Corkery. Obviously, it's in part 5 of the report, but if you actually read 5.5 and 5.6, obviously it already states that obviously we're awaiting confirmation from where we're actually going to, what funding we're going to get. So I think he's taking his half glass empty, so a bit of a Councillor Stubbs routine, if I'm honest. And he's probably going to a 5.6 where actually it doesn't sort of suggesting it's a budget pressure at the moment. So if you're not going to be showing a budget pressure in your cabinet papers come December or come February, I'll be quite happy with that. So we're not seeing a budget pressure as of yet on that. But let me just move on to the positive stuff in the... Actually, no, there's actually one more thing that isn't quite positive, and that was the pilot scheme that we're not going ahead with, which is the rent deposit scheme, which I'm not surprised about, if I'm honest. I think we knew it was going to be quite difficult to get an unsecured loan, so I appreciate the work that's gone into it, but I'm not unsurprised, and I don't think that we'll be revisiting that any shortly. And the report on that was very well written, so thank you to all that contributed. I appreciate it. And the positive thing, which is the pilot scheme, which I think is really positive for the Access team. I think you guys have done some really great work, and I'm just interested to see where that goes, because I think we've evaluated it at the moment. I think there's big things for that team moving forward, especially if it could be amalgamated into doing a lot of different things. I think Maria mentioned one of them about resident engagement. I think there could be definitely some good work in between yourselves on that. It's a really quite a positive thing. What I will say is, the only thing I would say that I'm just going to pick up on someone else's comments was about disabilities, and I think that is a really good point, Maria, so thanks for bringing it to us today. I think that's something that your team, especially Janice, could probably look into and see where we can actually try and factor that into the work you guys are already doing, but I'm sure you've got it in hand. But what I do want to know is, obviously it says in the report what the data is. What data have we actually got on disability housing in the private rented sector? Because obviously it's not fleshed out in the actual report as such, it's more in the background of it. So if you could share that data with us about how many people struggle to access the private rented sector that have a disability, I think it would be good for us as councillors and for people, for Maria from the Residents Consortium, to actually know what the numbers are, what the cost element is as well, and how you would mean to deliver anything moving forward. I think that's quite important, because we don't want to leave people that are marginalised in society. I think this is about ensuring that everybody has the same opportunity in the private rented sector.
Can I just say that most of the people have got the hidden disabilities that we've helped, rather than the physical disabilities, because a lot of Portsmouth properties are difficult to adapt anyway, the ones that I've been putting people into.
No, I know it's really not an easy thing. I mean, myself and Councillor Sanders have had quite lengthy conversations about these properties. I mean, I've got some being built at the moment down in Hilsey, so I understand the issues that go with that. But I think it'd just be interesting to see what the numbers are and how you guys are working around it. I think that'd be just something to bring back later at a later date, if you'd be happy to do so. But I think the pilot scheme is quite a big success, so I'm keen to see how you guys do it moving forward.
Thank you for that, Scott. Thank you. Yeah. I also wanted to start by coming back to what Cal was saying, which is that, as the report outlines, we ain't got a problem at the moment. If we do have a problem, then I certainly don't recall any barrier to using any additional funds where required, because it's important. I don't believe there's been a barrier that's been put in, certainly since 2018. Can't vouch for anyone else. But certainly since 2018 there is no such barrier. So just because we've never publicised it and put it on social media doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But there we go. But I do sympathise with the cuts to DHP, because I think it is essential, and we need as many tools in our armoury as possible. Like everyone else, I'm rather disappointed the credit union chose not to go with it. We tried everything, but if they don't want to do it, there's not much we can do. The council could do it, but we've already had a report saying how difficult that was going to be. Meredith has just outlined potential funding pressures coming down the line on the authority as a whole, and so I don't think that's sensible. The bond scheme, helping private tenants, is something that we as an administration said we were going to do, coming in to power in 2018, and we've sort of been doing it. Because we recognise that one of the key reasons for homelessness in this city, and the people that come to the civic offices panicking because they've just been evicted, is that very often they're behind with their rent, very often they need help, very often they don't know what to do. And this is a good way of encouraging people to go into the private sector. People keep telling me the city's full, and people keep telling me it's very difficult to build homes, and why should we build homes? So it's important actually to have an active private rented sector, otherwise we will get people on the streets. And that is not acceptable to us as an administration. I'm delighted that we've been able to make progress on that. I look forward to that. And so the other thing I would add is, as with Scott has said, the work that Janice and others have done in her team is astonishing. I mean, to get 200 households into private rented accommodation, many of whom would otherwise would have been walking the streets or been in our hotels or been in our B&Bs, is very, very good. And I think we want to see how that pilot works. It's also saved the council money, which is, for me, a side benefit, but for others may be quite very, very important as we go along. And that's absolutely essential, because one of the things we want to do as a council is actually sort of plan for things to happen. Plans in case things happen. Rather than actually wait and panic until they do happen, and then everybody has weekend meetings and panics. But actually good planning usually works. The one thing I would add to item 4, recommendation 4 if I may, Anna, is following what Maria said, is to thank and recognise the work of the pilot PRX Act 16, because if people do well, very often nobody says thank you. I've discovered in local government. And so I think it really is important. It's changed a lot of things. It's changed a lot of people's perceptions of this authority in a positive way. That's good. And it's changed people's lives because, as Maria has said, decent housing works. And so that's why they've been able to. So thank you very much. That's all right. Anytime. Thank you very much. And we want to come back and see how the bond scheme develops and grows, because we have to have a private rented sector scheme that is easier and safer for people to access. And that's why we've got 2 reports here today. But we've made progress as we said we would, and hopefully we'll make some more. So thank you very much, colleagues, for all that. And on that basis, I put forward those full recommendations with the 2 words added. Anna? Yep.
Recognise the work and thank.
Yes. You did your grammar better than I could. Your syntax is better than mine. This is superb. Thank you. Thank you. Right, we now move on to item 5, which is what's called an information report. So there's no decisions to be taken, but it's a way of actually updating people on what is going on, trying to be open and transparent. Paul, I believe you want to discuss the update on the actions from the private rental sector strategy 2021 to 2026.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, I'll briefly introduce this report, and Claire is here as Head of Private Sector Housing, and Sam as the Acting Housing Regulation Manager to support this. So the purpose of this information report is to update the progress of actions from the private rented sector strategy. Following on from the draft document and consultation process, the private sector housing service presented the final private rented sector strategy which was agreed back in January of this year, and that outlines 2 aims: to achieve an active and well-functioning private rented sector which works fairly for all, and for that to be seen as desirable type of tenure which meets the needs of those who use it, with support being focused on those who need it most. And the strategy has 9 strategic objectives which are outlined within the report. In order to achieve those objectives, actions were identified and agreed. A number of those actions had no additional permissions or resources to implement, whilst some needed further investigation, resources or permissions, and the report gives an update on those actions. So just briefly, the PRS have begun to survey data with a view to evidencing which addresses are possibly being used as unlicensed HMOs, and to take appropriate enforcement action. And the Council will continue to welcome members of the public informing them if they believe that a property is being used as an unlicensed HMO, and works closely with the Planning Service to investigate cases where they're raised. 4.2 on training. So a review of staff structure and management of the Housing Standards and Licensing team took place earlier this year, which resulted in a merger of the teams into a new housing regulation team, which provides more resilience and is better able to manage resources and respond to the demand as officers gain and grow their skills and attributes. The Rent It Right website is being revised with a review to maximising its content and making it better for those that use it. And a new role which came from the restructure of a tenant and landlord support officer has been introduced to the regulations team. That role is focusing on ensuring updated information is made available to both tenants and landlords on how to be a good tenant or landlord. And we're continuing to review the web contents, and particularly have added information on energy links to the landlord's page, transport, community safety, parking, and information on housing benefits. And in addition, we've produced an updated Contact Us form and an online report repair form to support customers to reach the right person and receive the right advice. Officers are continuing to work with residents groups across Portsmouth to increase the number of attendees to the governance board, currently looking at HMOs, and as we exit the pandemic, we're hoping to bring their voice more into that forum. 4.5, which is financial support, we've covered in the previous report that's come to this meeting. In terms of shared services, so the landlord and tenant officer is beginning some student workshops this month as students return to the city. 4.7 outlines the work that we're working with the planning service, and particularly that the current enforcement policy has been updated in response to the pandemic. And that update gives information on how private sector housing will respond to inspections, investigations, assessment of risk, and the response to non-urgent demand. A pilot has begun with the Portsmouth Mediation Service. The aims of the pilot are to refer landlords and tenants where the relationship between tenant and landlord is broken down, and they aim to act as an impartial party to facilitate positive conversation and resolve cases before they get to eviction. And that pilot will be reviewed at the end of this month. Accreditation in 5.4, so the current rented right accreditation scheme is under review and look to be how that can be redesigned to provide a better tailored support for landlords and tenants. And that work is ongoing. And finally, 5.5 gives an outline of the update on the process for additional licensing, and that process is outlined there. And the final thing for me to say is I think that the work of, as outlined in the information report, shows how well the work has continued, particularly through the pandemic, and I would personally thank the teams for their efforts during this period. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. That's very kind. Maria or Dawn, do either of you have anything to add or any comments to put forwards on this particular item? If not, that's fine. So you don't have to put your hand up, it's cool. It's all right, you're fine.
The merger of the separate teams into the new housing regulations team, did that incur any loss of members of the two teams, or was it a straightforward, we're stuck together now?
There were no compulsory redundancies as part of that. We did have some vacancies we were running at the time, but we created the team that was based on the demand, so we made sure that we've resourced against the demands that we've got.
Okay. Thank you. And, got to backtrack. 481. I'm losing myself again, sorry. Right, the Portsmouth Mediation Service, how is the pilot progressing, and do people requiring the need of the Portsmouth Mediation Service responding well to it, to the service?
I think, unfortunately, the answer is we're still waiting to see. So that we've given until the end of September, and then we'll be reviewing in October. So I wouldn't want to give too much feedback at this stage because we haven't fully analysed the outcome, but that will be coming forward in due course.
Oh, thank you. That's it.
That's very kind, Maria. Thank you very much. Dawn, did you have anything? Again, if you don't, that's absolutely fine. Okay, thank you very much. We will continue with going to a written deputation by Councillor Corkery, if I may.
I am grateful to hear about the progress being made on the private rental sector strategy, which came about following the Labour group motion to full council on landlord licensing back in 2019. However, it is disappointing to see the crucial issue of landlord licensing once again kicked down the road. In fact, we seem to have gone backwards on the issue with what was previously a seemingly firm commitment to consult on reintroducing landlord licensing for smaller houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, now becoming only a suggestion that this will be considered if all other measures fail. When the Cabinet Member for Housing previously removed the requirement for all HMOs to be licensed by the Council, the consequence was reduced capacity and power for the Council to proactively monitor housing conditions and property management of shared houses across the city. This has led to a situation whereby neighbour and community issues in areas with high densities of HMOs have proliferated, and residents are concerned the Council is not doing everything within its power to address these problems. If the Cabinet Member for Housing is truly committed to driving up standards in the private rented sector, protecting tenants' rights and delivering mixed and cohesive communities, then I would call on him to reverse his decision not to licence smaller HMOs and immediately task officers with reintroducing a comprehensive landlord licensing scheme covering all shared houses across the city.
Thank you. Scott, if I may, there are a few comments about me, which I don't normally expect. Do you mind if I just comment on those direct ones and then leave you to sort of talk about the more generic points?
Yeah, I'm quite looking forward to this.
I always like it when people know what I think without asking me. It is quite good. I have to say that this is one of the more interesting deputations I've ever had. Paragraph 1 is wrong. Paragraph 2 says that it's now a suggestion that this will be considered if all other measures fail. I've read the relevant section of the report, which for those people who are watching on live stream is, as soon as I can find it, which of course I can't, but anyway I will, which is section 5.5. At no stage in that section does it mention that phrase. I don't quite know which version of any report anybody's read, but I do have a problem when someone says that something will happen when it ain't happening. That I think is completely wrong. Paragraph 3, I understand Cal wasn't around when that decision was taken, but it shows the reasons to have the legal position, because the legal position is that I brought in additional licensing for the city. I'm the only person who's ever done it. I thought it was a good idea at the time, it was the right idea at the time. And when we were told 5 years later, the only way you can keep it is if the policy has failed, which to me was a suboptimal situation, because I wanted it still staying, then there's very little you can do. And that is why I remain keen to see it introduced if we can. The report does outline the rather long legal hurdles that need to be overcome, not least the approval of Michael Gove, which is something I would like to watch. But I do think the idea that somehow I don't care is, and I've gone back on a decision when the report doesn't justify it, is sadly wrong. We should be encouraging proper difference of opinion in a proper political discussion, but alternative facts is not something that I can enjoy. So I'm always happy to reverse a decision I never made, but I have not made a decision not to license smaller HMOs. The legal position is outlined in the report. I'm always I'm normally Councillor Corkery reads the reports in great detail. I'm disappointed he hasn't on this occasion. I should come back to my more generic comments on that, and I apologise for making personal criticisms. We shouldn't have to do it, but I just like it when people get their facts straight, and then we can talk about differences of opinion. So thank you. Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. That was very interesting. Just on that point, I think it's worth noting, it says in the last paragraph that immediately task officers were reintroducing a comprehensive landlord licensing scheme covering all shared houses in the city. Now, I'm going to ask a simple question. If we were to do that, would we be open immediately to a judicial review, and would we have the information to fight it?
So we are reviewing the data at the moment, but we would need to have, obviously, data that indicates there is an issue that additional licensing would solve.
So I'm going to say, would we be legally vulnerable?
If we didn't have appropriate justification and we just brought it in without a justification, yes, we would.
Because at the moment we don't have the justification because the data is still being compiled. That's what I'm getting at.
At this point in time today, yes, we're still reviewing the information.
Okay, so we don't have the data in the form that we need to at the moment, so we're legally vulnerable. So I think what Councillor Corkery is asking us to do is to put the council at risk. I think that's quite simple. You know, he's asking us to put the council at risk. He's asking you to put the council at risk, which I think you're doing the sensible thing in not doing that. My view on it is quite simple. I think all it's going to do is put up the rents for tenants. That's all it's going to do, because if we start hitting the landlords in the pocket, they're going to pass the cost on. I mean, I've made that point very, very often throughout this debate in the last 3 years, since Councillor Corkery's been on the council. We've spoken about it a lot. So I'm not going to talk about additional licensing anymore, so I don't want to hear it again in this meeting. So thank you on that point.
You must be disappointed.
Oh, you're going to talk about it again? Brilliant. On that point, we're just going to leave it there, but I think it's worth noting that in what Councillor Corker is asking, will leave the council legally vulnerable to a challenge from the Landlords Association, which will probably end up coming because they're a highly organised bunch, and I wouldn't accept anything less from them, to be fair. So moving on to the actual context of the report, I think it talks about objective one, obviously about the accreditation, and I think the accreditation is a really good thing. What is the buy-in for the landlords to seek accreditation? I'm looking at you. I don't know why I'm looking at you, Claire. I think it's the most obvious person.
So I think that's a good question, actually. In terms of accreditation, there has to be some incentive for landlords to want to join. So this report talks about the fact that that work is underway to understand what accreditation would look like in any new guise, and that involves talking to stakeholders, including the local landlord association, to understand what incentives would, incentivise the landlord to join the scheme.
Okay, thank you. 4.11 is a very interesting point. I'm just going to grab it onto my screen quickly. 4.11 talks about, obviously, through the private sector housing service, we can continue to pursue landlords of unlicensed HMOs in the city where evidence can be found to necessary action. I mean, I'm going to give you a context of an issue that I'm dealing with at the moment as in a ward issue. I've had a report of a unlicensed HMO with no planning permission. Yet the planning enforcement team have actually said they won't pursue it on a planning basis if they don't feel the need to, if they don't have the case to back it up, although they will allow it to operate outside the parameters. I mean, how does that fit with the work that you guys are doing? Are you speaking to those guys at the same time?
So we have very strong links with the planning department. We do operate under different legislation and we have different powers, but we communicate all the time regarding our cases and their cases and sharing knowledge and intelligence. It may be that in certain cases planning don't have the power to take appropriate action, but we may be able to take enforcement and vice versa.
I find it quite odd that on that case you've just said about planning not taking the appropriate action to enforce, but yourselves to take an appropriate action to enforce. Why would they not do that, and why would you choose to do it?
I can't speak on behalf of the planning department, but there would be restrictions on the powers that they have and how far they can extend.
Yeah, no, I just find it very odd. I think it's a very odd mixture that you have two bits of legislation that sits next to each other, and one will enforce and one won't. I just find that bizarre. I mean, you're looking at me and you probably agree, actually, it's quite bizarre. And then we move on to 4.15, which I think talks about rent it right, which is, no, that's not rent it right. Ignore me there. 4.3.1, which is rent it right. I mean, the report admits that it's not utilised to its full effect, and I think that is quite a fair comment. I mean, what are we doing to maximise the opportunities through the rent it right scheme? I know it says we're doing it, but what are we actually doing?
So in terms of the Rent It Right accreditation scheme, we are, as I said, reviewing what the accreditation scheme will look like going forward. So I think we do acknowledge that it has more potential than it currently has at the moment. I
mean, this is a little bit of criticism, Claire, and apologies. But I mean, we've been talking about Rent It Right, I think, for probably a good 18 months, and I know the pandemic's got in the way, and we've always talked about maximising the opportunities of it. And when I ask what we're doing, I know we're saying we're reviewing, but when I actually want to know how we're reviewing it. I mean, what the context, what's the operational on the day, how are we doing it? Are we doing a certain analysis? How is it that? What does it look like, that review?
So we're having discussions with, as I mentioned earlier, some key stakeholders, so the local landlord association. It will be something that will probably go through the governance board as well to understand what all the stakeholders involved. So we've talked about the fact in this report here that there are opportunities for residents' participation and tenant participation as well as landlords within that governance board.
Okay. I think it's probably more of a discussion for tomorrow at Governance Board. Okay, that's a fair point. 4.7 mentions the local plan and HMOs, which is fantastic. But, I mean, I think we're based on what the planning policy would allow us to do on that. So I think that's both of those go hand in hand, so I'm not really going to touch too much on that. In fact, I'm not going to bother. 4.8 is on the pilots, which actually is a mediation service. We can't mandate mediation, can we?
We can't.
We can't mandate it. So, I mean, I'm going to use the term, I mean, as you can tell, I do like to gamble. What's the buy-in for the aggrieved parties to go to mediation? I mean, we can't make them, so how are we going to get them there?
I mean, that's something that's actually being explored as part of the pilot and understanding what both parties, in terms of landlord and tenant, want to achieve from the scheme, and what their incentive is for each to join and what they get out of it as an experience, really.
Okay, it's the same with the private sector housing court that's been mooted as well. I think it's a nice idea, but in practice we can't actually make anyone do it, which does concern me. That are we just going down a line that in 6 to 12 months' time are we going to say, actually, we know we can't do that, that doesn't work? Are we going to have to amend the strategy as we go? Is it a fluid document?
I'm happy to comment on that, but I would want Paul to come in first, if that's all right with you, Scott.
Yeah, just to say, and it was in the strategy, when we did the surveys of tenants and landlords, one of the big things that came back from landlords is many of them don't actually want to evict if they're in that position, and actually they want a good tenant. So we know that most landlords actually want to find a way of working with their tenant, and so the idea of the mediation service is, can we help solve some of the barriers that have grown up, that actually landlords don't want to be there, and neither do the tenants.
It's a wonderful idea, but what I'm getting at is that we can't make anyone do it.
I think it's more nudge politics than legislation politics.
It is, essentially. What I'm getting at, Darren, though, is Councillor Sanders, apologies.
You can call me most things you like, but not some of the ones others call me.
No. What I'm getting at is that it's a fantastic idea. Are we going to have to amend the policy as we move on? Because this is what I'm saying, that this document has the ability to be quite fluid, yes, in terms of reacting to what's going on. And I can see the mediation service working okay for a certain amount of time, and all of a sudden landlord's going, I've done this 3 times, it hasn't worked, I'm not going back to mediation. Or the aggrieved party says, actually my landlord doesn't, he's not interested, I'm not going back to mediation. And that's the element of what I'm getting at. We're not going to know until we get further on down the line.
I view it very similarly to the DOJ MHCLG court mediation service, which is, I think, I could be wrong, Claire, it's I think about 12 people across England who are trying to deal with various cases when they've actually got the court, and no one has to go into it, but doing it is the right thing, because it's the consequence of not doing something. This is where the nudge comes in. For me, as a policy, this is where the nudge comes in. It's the consequence of not doing something. Paul is absolutely right. I mean, the strategists we know about, 6 the private landlords fell into it. There was what called accidental landlords. One of the weaknesses of the disagreement, as you know, between we have a disagreement over licensing policy, and we both have a disagreement with the Labour Party over licensing policy.
Absolutely.
But one of the disagreements is around that it don't always work. Licensing will not necessarily improve the standard of a property, which is a bit mad. It won't help with rent arrears. So that's why you have to do a whole range of other things. And mediating has worked reasonably well with us as a social landlord. It is different because there is a difference in the power relationship, but it is something that's been worked on quite extensively with private landlords who are very, very, very keen to do this, as we both know. And will it evolve? Almost certainly. Will we take on board what doesn't work? If we don't, we're stupid. But I think the idea is good. So the answer to your question is possibly. But at the moment we don't know, because we haven't done the first round of evaluations. I'm sorry, I'm intervening in an operational manner, but from a policy perspective, that's my approach. It is more nudge theory rather than do what you're told at gunpoint theory.
No, I get the point. I mean, as you know, I quite enjoy data-driven exercises, so I'd like to see the data behind of how this works over a certain amount of time. Sorry, people around the table don't get used to it. I actually quite like a spreadsheet, so you get used to the fact that I like to see the numbers. So I think the numbers are important. And then I did have one thing that brought out the question that Maria said about the merging of the 2 teams, which is a question for you, Paul. I mean, what was the cost saving? Because you mentioned some vacancies not being filled. So how many vacancies was it, and how much was the cost saving?
Off the top of my head, I haven't got those answers. We were running a couple of vacancies at the time, but I can't remember exactly what the what the number of vacancies or any reductions in funding.
Okay. It's just an interesting point. Obviously, there was an element of, obviously, I think you said there were some vacancies not being filled, so there will be an in-year saving to be made on that. And I'd just be keen to know what it was. If you could send the information to me via email, I'd be appreciated. Unless the finance bod behind you knows. And no, he doesn't, so that's simple. That's quite an easy answer. Thank you, Wayne. I'm finished now and I'm done.
Well, I like honesty. It's always very helpful, I find. Thank you very much. With regards to your point, Scott, about planning, I think one of the things that we were particularly keen on, I mean, I remember being on a planning committee and being told, no, nobody knows this is a HMO for planning because it couldn't be a HMO for planning, but it could be a HMO for licensing. And this was in the days when my lot were in opposition. And I remember going, that is not happening if we're back in charge. And I think since 2019, extensive efforts have been made to merge and to align, the slightly different legal biases between the planning and licensing departments. We'll never merge them because there are slightly different legal approaches, but we are trying our best to align them. And that's why I'm pleased that actually a bit more work is being done on trying to track down the unlicensed HMOs that you, me and the other 40 councillors frankly all get from time to time.
Yeah, it's quite a bane on our casework. I mean, you know what it's like for us to have those issues. It happens all the time. I think the issue we've got now is not you, Claire. I think your team do a really fantastic job. I think the planning department is in utter disarray at the moment. I think that is the problem that we're finding more than anything. And that is, sorry, I shouldn't say that.
Well, you have, and I would say that there are, as we well know, there are various issues with various departments around COVID across the council.
Actually, I make no apologies for saying that because it's true.
And that's all being worked on, as we know. But it is important to actually align it, and I think that aligning work is really important, and I'm glad it's continuing. Just as I'm glad it's continuing that many other things are actually happening. This is not a statutory service. We don't have to do this, but we want to do it because we want to make the city better. And we want to make sure that, I rent privately, and I've got a great landlord, but I know various other people across the city don't have a great landlord. And it is one of the things that keeps coming back every single time someone asks me on the housing waiting list to move, because they wanted a more secure, easier and safer private rented sector. And actually planning for that is a crucial way of dealing with the housing crisis that exists in this city. And I'm delighted that we've come as far as we have. There are many, many things further to go. I'm disappointed that some of our colleagues are focused on licensing, when I would love to see ideas from all political groups about how to improve the rented sector as a whole. I mean, we as an administration have got more than 20. I know our Conservative colleagues have come up with a fair few, which we're very grateful for, and I want to see ideas from all political parties so that we can actually work together to try and do the best possible deal for the city. And it's not just one thing, it's got to be everything, because this cannot be solved by being a one-club golfer. And that is really, really important. There will continue to be points of disagreement, and that's absolutely fine, and we'll try our best to work through them, and if we can't, we won't. But I'm very, very pleased with this report. Again, I'm particularly delighted that Janice and her team are on board, because they have changed massively the relationships we have with many, many people, and have changed people's lives. I mean, this is quite astonishing. When I get told by people who normally hate my guts to basically clone Janice, I'm mildly impressed, I have to say. But it's a fantastic achievement that we've done, and we haven't done it without the £1.5 million that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority have got from the Nationwide Foundation and Shelter. We've done it just by actually talking to people. There's a long way to go. We've made a start, and for that I'm very impressed, and there will be more things to come, I'm sure. So I'm only down to note this. I'm only down to note this report that I requested. Is that right? Excellent. Well, I'm delighted I requested it. Right. Okay. I don't believe there is anything else. So on that basis, I'm happy to close the meeting at 5:43. Please all have a safe trip home. Thank you.